Daniel Ross walked through the busy airport with his backpack slung over one shoulder and his military uniform freshly pressed. He had just finished a long tour overseas and was finally heading home to his little sister and their small house in Georgia. His face looked tired, but there was peace in his eyes. He had survived war. Now, all he wanted was a quiet ride home. At the check-in counter, the airline staff noticed Daniel's uniform. The young woman behind the desk smiled politely and said, "Sir, thank you for your service. We've upgraded your seat to first class, no extra charge." Daniel was surprised. "Really? Thank you, ma'am. That's very kind of you." "You deserve it," she replied. Holding his boarding pass tightly, Daniel made his way to the gate. He didn't need special treatment. In fact, he preferred to stay quiet. But this upgrade felt like a small thank you for the nights he had stayed awake under enemy fire, for the friends he had lost, and for the family he had missed so much. As the gate opened, Daniel joined the line for boarding. The airport staff smiled and nodded at him, but many passengers didn't even look up. He didn't mind. Once inside the plane, he turned into the first-class cabin. The seats were wide and soft, and the lighting was gentle. A flight attendant greeted him warmly. "Welcome aboard, sir. Can I help you with your bag?" "No, thank you, I got it," he replied, placing his backpack in the overhead bin. As Daniel made his way to his seat, 2B, a well-dressed woman in her mid-50s was already seated in 2A, the window seat. She wore expensive jewelry and carried a designer handbag. Her hair was neat and her voice sharp. When she saw Daniel approaching, her smile faded. Her eyes narrowed at his boots, his short military haircut, and his uniform. As Daniel settled into his seat, she suddenly turned to the flight attendant and said loudly, "Excuse me, is this man supposed to sit next to me?" The flight attendant looked surprised. "Yes, ma'am. That's his assigned seat." The woman frowned and leaned away from Daniel like he had a disease. "I'm sorry, but I paid for this seat. I don't feel comfortable sitting next to someone like him." The attendant blinked, unsure what to say. "Ma'am, he has every right to be here." Daniel said nothing. He had heard comments like this before. He sat still, his hands folded in his lap, but behind his calm eyes he was tired. Tired of the disrespect, tired of the looks. "I don't care who he is," Mrs. Wilkins continued. "First class is for paying customers, not for people who—" She paused and waved her hand as if Daniel wasn't even human. Passengers nearby began turning their heads. Whispers filled the cabin. Daniel slowly turned his head toward the woman and said quietly, "Ma'am, I'm just trying to get home." "That's all," she scoffed. "Then maybe you should go sit in the back with the rest." The flight attendant looked helpless. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Let me see if I can speak with the captain." Daniel nodded. "It's okay, I'll wait." As the flight attendant walked away, a quiet tension filled the air. Daniel looked out the window, trying to ignore the stares. The woman beside him crossed, her arms tightly, clearly unhappy. But while she argued and judged, a man sitting behind her in seat 3A watched everything, quietly and carefully. He didn't say a word. He wore a black jacket and held a small book in his lap, but his eyes never left the scene in front of him. When the flight attendant returned, she looked stressed. "Sir, I spoke to the captain. He says there's nothing wrong with your seat." "Please stay where you are." Mrs. Wilkins rolled her eyes and muttered, "Unbelievable." Daniel simply nodded again. "Thank you." Just before takeoff, the man in seat 3A slowly pressed the call button above him. The flight attendant walked over. "Yes, sir?" He leaned in and whispered something. Her eyes widened slightly and she nodded quickly before walking away. The man then looked straight ahead, silent once more. The woman still didn't realize who was sitting behind her, and she had no idea that her rude behavior was about to reach someone she would deeply regret offending. As the plane taxied to the runway, the cabin grew still, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. And Daniel? He sat quietly, waiting for the flight to begin, never knowing that someone very important had just decided he wouldn't let this moment pass without action. As the plane lifted off the ground, Daniel leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes for a moment. He was tired. Tired from the mission, tired from the war, and now tired from being judged for simply wearing a uniform. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted peace. Beside him, Mrs. Wilkins sat stiffly, arms crossed, lips tight. She refused to even look at him. Every few minutes she shifted uncomfortably, as if sitting next to Daniel was a personal insult. But behind her, in seat 3A, the silent man remained still. His name was Colonel James Carter, a high-ranking officer in the U.S. military, one of the most respected men in special operations. Most people didn't recognize him out of uniform, but he had served over 25 years in the most dangerous places in the world. He had seen soldiers like Daniel before, young, brave, tired, and quietly strong. He had also seen people like Mrs. Wilkins, loud, proud, and blind to the sacrifices made for their freedom. Colonel Carter hadn't spoken yet, but he was watching. He didn't act on emotion, he observed. And what he had seen in the past 15 minutes had already told him enough about her. As the flight continued, a flight attendant brought drinks to the first-class passengers. When she handed Daniel a bottle of water, Mrs. Wilkins sighed loudly. Of course, give him water like he earned it. The attendant looked shocked. Daniel said nothing. He just gave a small smile to the flight attendant, trying to make things easier for her. That smile, that quiet strength, was exactly why Colonel Carter stood up. He rose from his seat slowly, and his tall frame cast a shadow across both of E. The Mrs. Wilkins glanced up, annoyed at first, but when she saw his serious face, her expression shifted. "Excuse me," she said. "Can I help you?" Colonel Carter looked at her calmly. "Actually, ma'am, I think I can help you." She blinked, confused. "I don't know what you mean. I saw how you treated this soldier. I heard every word, and I've stayed silent. Long enough." The cabin grew quiet. Nearby, passengers stopped reading, stopped talking. Even the flight attendant paused in the aisle. Mrs. Wilkins sat up straighter. "This doesn't concern you." "Oh, but it does," the colonel replied. "Because that young man sitting beside you, he's one of the reasons you get to fly, safely in a country where you're free to speak your mind, even if it's ugly." Daniel turned in surprise, recognizing the voice. His eyes widened. "Colonel Carter?" The older man smiled at him. "Hello, son. Didn't expect to see you." "Here." Mrs. Wilkins looked between them. "You know him?" "I do," said Colonel Carter. "I trained him, I led him, and I watched him risk his life for people he never even met." Mrs. Wilkins scoffed. "Well, that doesn't mean he belongs in first class." The colonel's voice grew a little colder. "Actually, that's exactly why he belongs here. Because while you were buying handbags, he was dodging bullets. While you were complaining about delays, he was carrying his injured teammate through the dirt with no food or sleep." Silence. The whole cabin listened. Colonel Carter looked straight at her. "You judged him for wearing a uniform. But let me tell you something. If this plane ever had a problem, I'd trust him to save you before you even knew what was happening." Daniel looked down, a little embarrassed, but the colonel rested a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to say a word, son. You've already done enough." Mrs. Wilkins opened her mouth to argue, but for once no words came out. She looked around and saw the eyes of other passengers. No one was on her side. The colonel turned back to his seat, but before he sat down, he added quietly, "Next time you fly, ma'am, maybe you should hope there's a soldier nearby. You never know when you might need one." Then he sat down. Mrs. Wilkins stared ahead, face pale, suddenly very quiet. Daniel finally leaned back in his seat again, but this time he felt seen. Not for glory or praise, but for the truth of who he was, and the flight wasn't even halfway done yet. After Colonel Carter sat back down, the cabin stayed quiet. Mrs. Wilkins didn't say another word. Her confident smirk was gone. Instead, she looked uncomfortable, like someone who had just realized they were being watched by the whole plane. Daniel looked out the window, still quiet. He wasn't used to being defended like that. Most people just ignored him or judged him by his uniform. He had seen that look in Mrs. Wilkins' eyes many times before, But what Colonel Carter did, that was different. A few minutes later, the same flight attendant who had been treated badly by Mrs. Wilkins came back. This time, she smiled gently and bent down next to Daniel. "Excuse me, sir," she said in a soft voice. "Would you like anything to eat? We have a special meal for our heroes today." Daniel blinked in surprise. Thank you. Just the regular meal is fine." She nodded, then whispered, "I just wanted to say thank you. My brother's in the Navy. You remind me of him." Daniel gave a small smile. "Tell him to stay safe." As the flight went on, other passengers started noticing him too, not with fear or judgment, but with quiet respect. One man even offered Daniel his headphones when he saw his were broken. A mother told her little boy to wave at the brave soldier. But even with the kindness, Daniel's mind was still heavy. He thought about his team. Some of them didn't make it back. Others were in hospitals, fighting their own silent battles. And here he was, being insulted for just sitting in a seat. He took a deep breath. From behind, Colonel Carter noticed. The older man leaned forward. "You all right, son?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, just thinking." Carter studied his face. "Still carrying weight from the field?" Daniel gave a short nod. "Hard to forget things, especially the ones we left behind." Colonel Carter's voice softened. "I know. But don't forget, you came back. That means you've still got a purpose." Daniel looked at him. "Sometimes I wonder what that is." Carter didn't answer right away. Instead, he said, "Let me tell you something." And then he began to speak about a mission years ago, about a time when he almost didn't make it back, about how one young soldier's bravery had saved a whole team. As he spoke, even the nearby passengers listened. His voice was calm but powerful. His words painted a picture of sandstorms, gunfire, and courage in the dark. And slowly, the cabin of the airplane didn't feel like a flight anymore. It felt like a story unfolding, a story of sacrifice. Mrs. Wilkins shifted in her seat. She didn't look so proud anymore. When Colonel Carter finished, he looked at Daniel. "I shared that story because people like you need to hear it. Not because you've forgotten who you are, but because the world tries to make you forget." Daniel's eyes filled slightly, but he blinked the tears away. "Thank you, sir. You earned it, son. All of it." At that moment, the captain's voice came on the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We'd like to give a special thank you to one of our passengers today, a brave soldier who has served our country with honor." The passengers clapped softly. Mrs. Wilkins sat frozen, cheeks red. She didn't clap. Daniel gave a polite nod, still humble, but deep inside something began to heal. This flight wasn't just taking him home, it was bringing back something he thought he had lost, his sense of worth. And the journey was far from over. The applause had faded, but its echo still lived in the hearts of many on that flight. Daniel sat quietly in his seat, his uniform now seen with pride instead of judgment. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, not just as a soldier, but as a human being. But not everyone was at peace. Mrs. Wilkins sat stiffly beside him, her jaw clenched. She stared straight ahead, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. Her once confident air had melted away. Suddenly, she reached for the call button above her seat. A soft ding sounded, and within moments the flight attendant returned. "Yes, ma'am?" she asked, her voice kind but firm. "I'd like to be moved," Mrs. Wilkins said coldly. "I don't feel comfortable sitting next to him." The attendant didn't flinch. "I'm sorry, ma'am, the flight is full." "There are no open seats." Mrs. Wilkins narrowed her eyes. "You mean to tell me there's not one open seat in economy?" "Not one?" The attendant's smile faded slightly. "No, ma'am. And even if there were, you purchased a first-class ticket. You'd have to downgrade yourself." Mrs. Wilkins opened her mouth, then closed it. The idea of sitting in economy was beneath her. The flight attendant added, "And for the record, ma'am, many of us are proud to be seated next to him," and with that, she walked away. Daniel stayed quiet. He didn't even look at Mrs. Wilkins. He didn't need to. Her silence said everything. As the plane cruised above the clouds, the atmosphere changed. Whispers traveled row to row. Did you hear what she said to the soldier? Can you believe she tried to get him kicked out? She's probably embarrassed now. But one person wasn't whispering. A little girl sitting 2 rows behind leaned forward and asked her mom, "Is that man a hero?" Her mother smiled. "Yes, sweetheart, he is." The little girl waved to Daniel. "Thank you, soldier man." Daniel turned around and smiled. "You're welcome." Then came the unexpected. "Colonel." Carter stood up from his seat again. He cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said in a firm but calm voice, "I wasn't planning to speak again, but I believe there's something everyone should remember today." The cabin became quiet. Even the flight attendants paused. This man beside me, this young soldier, came back from service where others did not. He didn't ask for applause. He didn't ask for special treatment. And yet he was treated like a problem. Carter's voice hardened slightly. "That kind of disrespect doesn't belong in our skies, or our country." People nodded. Some clapped. Others looked down, ashamed. And then he looked at Mrs. Wilkins. "Ma'am," he said, "you don't have to like the military. You don't even have to like him. But you do have to respect the uniform that gives you the right to sit in peace. On this plane, in this country." Mrs. Wilkins turned red. But she said nothing. The captain's voice returned on the speaker. "We support our service members. At all times, thank you, Colonel Carter, and thank you to our hero, Daniel." More applause. This time it was louder. Daniel lowered his head, humble. He didn't crave the spotlight, but somehow it had found him. For the rest of the flight, Mrs. Wilkins kept quiet. She didn't speak, didn't move, didn't even ask for water. She had lost something that day, not just her pride, but the respect of everyone around her. Daniel, on the other hand, had gained something more powerful than applause. Dignity, courage, and the reminder that sometimes justice doesn't come with shouting, but with quiet strength and the truth spoken at 30,000 feet. The flight wasn't over, and the best part of Daniel's journey was still ahead. The plane continued to fly smoothly, but the air around Mrs. Wilkins had changed. She felt it. People were still talking, softly, but their eyes glanced her way. Some shook their heads, others whispered. A few just ignored her altogether, but one man hadn't looked at her once. Daniel, the soldier she tried to humiliate, was now calmly reading a small book from his pocket. His expression was peaceful. He didn't act angry. He didn't even act proud. He just acted normal. That bothered Mrs. Wilkins more than anything. She fidgeted in her seat. She stared at her expensive watch. She looked toward the back of the plane as if waiting for someone, waiting for this flight to end. And then, she did something unexpected. She leaned toward Daniel and whispered, "I didn't mean anything by D." Daniel looked up slowly. "Excuse me?" "I didn't know you were real military," she said, lowering her voice even more. "I thought maybe you were just wearing the uniform." He raised an eyebrow. "Even if I wasn't, does that make it okay to treat someone like that?" Mrs. Wilkins paused. She didn't answer, because she couldn't. Daniel returned to his book without saying another word, but someone else had heard the exchange, Colonel Carter. He'd been pretending to sleep, but one eye had remained half open. And now, he leaned forward. "I've seen this before," he said softly, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. "People like her. They're brave when no one's watching, but they crumble when the world stands still." Daniel gave a small smile. "I'm not worried about her," Colonel Carter chuckled. "I know, but you should be ready." "Ready for what?" Daniel asked. Carter looked toward the cockpit. "They haven't made the announcement yet, but someone's waiting for you at the gate." Daniel blinked. "What do you mean?" "I pulled some strings, made a call. After everything that happened, on this flight, I thought the world deserved to meet you properly." Daniel looked concerned now. "I didn't want attention. I just wanted to go home." "I know, son," Carter said, "but sometimes heroes don't get to choose when they're noticed." Back in row 3, a flight attendant spoke quietly into her radio. Yes, he's on board. Seat 1A, arriving in 45 minutes. Daniel didn't hear that, but someone else did. Mrs. Wilkins glanced up, eyes narrowed. Who's waiting for him? She asked the attendant. The woman raised a brow. Why? Are you planning to thank him too? Mrs. Wilkins didn't answer. Instead, she leaned back in her seat, now clearly uncomfortable. There was something going on, something bigger than just an awkward flight. Her curiosity burned. Her pride was breaking, and deep down she had a feeling this wasn't just any soldier. There was more to him, much more. As the plane began its slow descent, the captain spoke again. Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for landing. We have a special guest waiting at the arrival gate. We'll explain more once we've landed. Until then, thank you for flying with us. Daniel looked at Colonel Carter, confused. What's going on? Carter smiled. You'll see. Mrs. Wilkins gripped the armrest tightly. She didn't like mysteries, especially ones where she wasn't the center of attention. But this time she wasn't the story. Daniel was. And as the city lights appeared through the window, glowing like stars below, she realized this wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. The plane continued to fly smoothly, but the air around Mrs. Wilkins had changed. She felt it. People were still talking, softly, but their eyes glanced her way. Some shook their heads, others whispered. A few just ignored her altogether. But one man hadn't looked at her once. Daniel. The soldier she tried to humiliate was now calmly reading a small book from his pocket. His expression was peaceful. He didn't act angry. He didn't even act proud. He just acted normal. That bothered Mrs. Wilkins more than anything. She fidgeted in her seat. She stared at her expensive watch. She looked toward the back of the plane as if waiting for someone, waiting for this flight to end. And then she did something unexpected. She leaned toward Daniel and whispered, I didn't mean anything by... Dewey? Daniel looked up slowly. Excuse me? I didn't know you were real military, she said, lowering her voice even more. I thought maybe you were just wearing the uniform. He raised an eyebrow. Even if I wasn't, does that make it okay to treat someone like that? Mrs. Wilkins paused. She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Daniel returned to his book without saying another word. But someone else had heard the exchange. Colonel Carter. He'd been pretending to sleep, but one eye had remained half open, and now he leaned forward. I've seen this before, he said softly, just loud enough for Daniel to hear. People like her. They're brave when no one's watching, but they crumble when the world stands still. Daniel gave a small smile. I'm not worried about her. Colonel Carter chuckled. I know, but you should be ready. Ready for what? Daniel asked. Carter looked toward the cockpit. They haven't made the announcement yet, but someone's waiting for you at the gate. Daniel blinked. What do you mean? I pulled some strings. Made a call. After everything that happened. On this flight, I thought the world deserved to meet you properly. Daniel looked concerned now. I didn't want attention. I just wanted to go home. I know, son, Carter said. But sometimes heroes don't get to choose when they're noticed. Back in row 3, a flight attendant spoke quietly into her radio. Yes, he's on board. Seat 1A. Arriving in 45 minutes. Daniel didn't hear that, but someone else did. Mrs. Wilkins glanced up, eyes narrowed. Who's waiting for him? She asked the attendant. The woman raised a brow. Why? Are you planning to thank him too? Mrs. Wilkins didn't answer. Instead, she leaned, back in her seat, now clearly uncomfortable. There was something going on. Something bigger than just an awkward flight. Her curiosity burned. Her pride was breaking. And deep down, she had a feeling this wasn't just any soldier. There was more to him, much more. As the plane began its slow descent, the captain spoke again. Ladies and gentlemen, please prepare for landing. We have a special guest waiting at the arrival gate. We'll explain more once we've landed. Until then, thank you for flying with us. Daniel looked at Colonel Carter, confused. What's going on? Carter smiled. You'll see. Mrs. Wilkins gripped the armrest tightly. She didn't like mysteries, especially ones where she wasn't the center of attention. But this time, she wasn't the story. Daniel was. And as the city lights appeared through the window, glowing like stars below, she realized this wasn't the end of the journey. It was just the beginning. The next day, Daniel's story was everywhere. News channels ran the headline, "Soldier insulted on flight turns out to be a national hero." Clips from the airport went viral. Millions watched as Daniel quietly hugged his mother, received a salute from the general, and thanked the little girl who gave him a gift. But what people couldn't stop talking about was his silence. He never said a bad word about the woman who insulted him. He never pointed her out in interviews. When a reporter finally asked him about it, Daniel simply said, "I didn't fight for a seat in first class. I fought so we all have the freedom to be better." Those words broke the internet. Everyone praised his humility, his strength, and his calm under pressure. Even people who didn't know him felt proud of him. But while the world was clapping for Daniel, Mrs. Wilkins sat alone in her home, watching everything unfold on the news. She hadn't been named, but she knew, and so did the other passengers on the flight. Her phone didn't ring. Her friends didn't call. Some even unfollowed her on social media, because everyone knew. She judged a hero based on a uniform. Her mistake would follow her for a long time, and yet, one day she did something no one expected. She sent a letter, not to the news, not to the airline, to Daniel. The envelope arrived at a military center. Daniel opened it quietly. Inside, the handwriting was careful and neat. Dear Sergeant Daniel, I am deeply sorry for how I treated you. I judged you without knowing your story, but your actions taught me something I'll never forget. Real heroes don't wear capes, they wear honor. Thank you for showing the world how to act with true strength. I will carry this lesson forever. Monsieur Wilkins. Daniel sat still after reading it. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He folded the letter, put it in his jacket pocket, and walked out into the sunshine. Because for him, the moment was already over. The real victory wasn't in proving someone wrong. It was in staying true to who he was. A soldier, a son, a quiet example of strength in a world that sometimes forgets what it looks like. As he walked past a group of kids playing, one boy pointed and said, "That's the hero from the plane." Daniel smiled softly and waved. He didn't need applause, he didn't need revenge, he just wanted to go home, hug his mom, and live his life in peace. And that's exactly what he did, because in the end, the world remembered one thing above all.